This is the kind of bumping that you will need, but you can see that mine are a little bit on the worn side. So I made my own. The tiny little loops at the bottom catch in your hair and don't work very well, so I would recommend working with the ones that you can buy. The first thing you need to do is to tie a knot at the end of your pin. Leave about a 7-inch tail to tie in later on. Make your knot nice and tight. Then pick up 2 delica beads, pass under the pin and up through the delica bead on the right. You need to get these 2 beads sitting side by side. Keep your work tension, pick up 1 more delica bead. Then once again pass under the pin, leaving the bead on the other side, and pass up through this bead. Continue adding your delica beads until you have added 8 in total across the top. Now turn your work over and pick up 2 number 11 seed beads. You now need to pass your needle through the tiny little loop between the first 2 cylinder beads and then back up through the bead on the right. Pick up 1 seed bead and go through the next loop between the delica beads and back up through this bead. Continue in this way all the way to the end of your row of cylinder beads. At the end of the row, you now need to add in 2 seed beads in this last loop. So we add them one at a time, first one, and back up through the seed bead. Then pick up another seed bead. Pass your needle through the very same loop that you just used. And back up through this seed bead. Pull your beads tightly together and try to get them to sit snugly. You can see here that there's a gap forming on the cylinder beads, but we'll get to that later and I'll show you how to tighten that up if it doesn't go away. So turn your work over again, and just as you did before, with maybe a different coloured seed bead, pick up 2 seed beads and go through the first loop of the row before. Get these to sit side by side and come back up through the bead on the right. Add in the third seed bead. And the fourth seed bead. I'm now going to increase. I'm squeezing an extra bead along here. This is roughly about the middle. So pick up one seed bead underneath the loop, back up through the bead, and pick up another seed bead and come back through that same loop. This will effectively squeeze in an extra bead on this row. If you don't add it, it will just look slightly gappy. And it will also affect the numbers, the number of beads that you have on the last row, which might make it tricky to add the bicones. So now just add in the rest of the seed beads along this row, just as you did before. And on the very last loop, add in 2 seed beads, just as you did before. This row should now have 11 seed beads. Turn your work over and continue as before, using the 11 seed beads. And again, going to add in an extra bead to squeeze that extra bead in roughly about the middle. At the end of this row, you should have 13 seed beads now across the top. Work another row, but this time don't increase in the middle, don't squeeze any more beads in. Just add in 1 seed bead for every loop across the top of this row until you get to the end, where you will put in 2 seed beads in the last loop, just as you did before. On the last row, you add in 2 seed beads, but instead of going through the first loop, you must go through the second loop. This is badly edited in the video and I'm very sorry for it, but you go through the second loop and up through the bead on the right. You should now have a bead count of 14 across the top of the row. Pick up one bicone and 3 number 15s, slide them down, place the number 15 beads back through the bicone and come through the bead next to where you're exiting and the bead below that. Pull your thread all the way through, pull them nice and tight. And now pass your needle up through the adjacent bead of this row and the one above that, the silver one. So you're passing through 2 beads. Pick up another bicone and 3 15s. And just as you did before, slide these beads down to the end. Miss out the number 15s. Come back through the bicone, through the adjacent bead and the one below it. And back up through the 2 adjacent beads. You need to add in the bicones all the way across the top. When you get to the last bicone, pass your needle through a few more beads and then weave your thread up and down through your work. There's no need to knot it. Just weave it backwards and forwards a couple of times. Because I'm using fireline, this is the way I like to cut it. Hold the thread really tight. And instead of cutting with my scissors, I slide them against the beadwork until it snaps. I find this doesn't leave a fuzzy end. So now I've threaded my needle onto the tail end. And if you remember, I said I'd explain how to cure this hole here. All you have to do is sew through just these 2 beads in a circle and pull them tight. Once you've done that and woven this loose thread up and down through your beads, just backwards and forwards a couple of times. Then once again, just make your thread really tight. Just slide your scissors against the fire line. Done.